On December 24, 1968, the moment William Anders pressed the shutter, human history was rewritten forever. He captured a photo, a blue planet slowly rising from the lunar horizon. It was the first time in human history that we saw Earth rising. Just like watching the sun rising from the horizon, Anders was stunned. He shouted, "Oh my God, look at that Earth rising. Hand me the color film." That photo was later praised as the single most important photograph ever taken by mankind. Even more shocking, 8 hours later, 3 astronauts orbiting the moon pointed a camera at themselves and began reading the book of Genesis. At that moment, 1 billion people on Earth were listening. That was 1/4 of the entire human population. They were reading about God creating heaven and earth from 380,000 kilometers away, while they themselves were witnessing the craziest miracle humans had ever achieved. 3 ordinary men flying to the moon in what was basically an aluminum can. But what most people don't know is that these 3 almost never came home. Apollo 8 was a gamble from the very beginning. NASA calculated the odds, only a 50% chance of surviving. Like flipping a coin for life or death. And even crazier, this mission was decided only 4 months before launch. The original plan was just to test the lunar module in Earth orbit, but in August 1968, the CIA reported that the Soviets might attempt a circumlunar mission before the end of the year. If they succeeded first, the U.S. would lose the space race permanently. So NASA made a radical choice, remove the lunar module entirely, and send only the command module directly to the moon. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders would become the first humans to ever leave Earth's gravitational protection. When they received the order, they only had 4 months left. They had to learn how to fly 380,000 kilometers away, how to break precisely into lunar orbit, how to calculate the exact re-entry angle. One mistake meant certain death. Borman's wife later said he couldn't sleep at night because he told her this was the riskiest mission in the entire Apollo program. And the most terrifying part was the maneuvering itself. Flying to the moon wasn't just accelerate and go. It was a bet with tolerances down to 0.1 degree. Apollo 8 used the Saturn V1 10 meters tall, 2,900 tons at liftoff, with 85% of its mass being fuel, just to throw a 45 ton capsule into lunar orbit in only 11 minutes. The rocket had to accelerate to 11 km per second, enough to travel from Beijing to Tianjin in 1 second. They endured 4 gs of acceleration, like 4 of their own weight crushing them. But the lunar orbit insertion burn was even more dangerous. The engine could only fire once. If the angle was off by just 0.1 degrees, they would either crash into the moon or sling into deep space, never to return, and this burn had to be done behind the moon, completely out of radio contact. Mission Control could do nothing except wait. On December 24th, the 3 disappeared behind the far side. Houston fell silent. All eyes were on a 48-minute countdown. If the timer reached 0 and there was no response, it meant the burn failed, and they were lost forever. Those 48 minutes were the longest in the history of human spaceflight. Then suddenly, Frank Borman's voice came through. Houston erupted. They were alive, but this was only halfway. They still needed to survive the way back home. And in the middle of that life and death mission, Anders pressed that shutter. Most people don't know, the camera was loaded with black and white film. Their primary mission was mapping the lunar surface for landing sites. Only 1 roll of color film was on board, and half of it was already used. Anders had only a few seconds to find it, load it, focus, and shoot. If he was a few seconds slower, Earth would rise too high, and history would lose its most important photograph forever. And that photograph's meaning went far beyond aesthetics. For the first time, humans saw Earth as one whole system. From the moon, there were no borders, no races, not even buildings, just blue oceans, white clouds, and thin traces of green and brown land. But what truly transformed the astronauts was something later called the overview effect, a term coined by Frank White in 1987. He interviewed dozens of astronauts and found the same psychological shock. When you stand in lunar darkness and silence, and you see Earth hanging there like a fragile crystal ball, you suddenly realize how small and vulnerable humanity truly is. You cannot see the wars, the hatred, the struggle for power and money. In that instant, a cosmic-level loneliness hits your soul. Borman later said, "We went to explore the moon, but we discovered the Earth. It sounds poetic, but it's a profound truth. Humans spent thousands of years debating whether Earth was the center of the universe, whether humans were the chosen species. But once we actually left Earth and looked back from 380000 km, we understood. Every war, every love, every civilization, all happened on that tiny speck of dust floating in the darkness. And the universe does not care." On December 25th, Apollo 8 fired the engine to return home, their final gamble. The re-entry angle had to be perfect. Too steep, they burn to ash. Too shallow, they skip off the atmosphere like a stone across water and drift into space forever. Their speed was 40,000 km per hour, 30 times faster than a bullet. For 6 minutes, the capsule was surrounded by a hellfire of plasma at 2800 C, hot enough to melt steel. And when the parachutes finally opened and they splashed down in the Pacific, Borman said, "It's been a long way, but we're home." More than 50 years have passed. Those men are now gone or old. But that Earthrise photo still hangs in the United Nations, reminding everyone who walks by, we only have one Earth, no backup, no second chance, just like Apollo 8 had only one ignition attempt. People say Apollo 8 was the most successful failure mission in human history. Because they weren't trying to conquer the moon, they made humanity rediscover Earth. Carl Sagan later said, "Our planet is just a lonely little dot in the vast universe." Every person you ever knew, every person you ever heard of, every human who ever existed lived their entire life on that speck of light. Every joy and sorrow, every belief and ideology, every hunter and thief, every hero and coward, all lived on this tiny particle suspended in a beam of sunlight. Maybe this is Apollo 8's greatest legacy, not technology, not lunar data, but making us finally understand, in this infinite universe, we are so small and yet so precious.